and also the hypothesis, which also becomes the objective for this study. So moving on to the next slide. Yeah, that is why are joints important. Basically this is also the background of why the study has been study is done on the joints. So according to the author, he has given two explanations. I would like to portray it in terms of images. Muscles doesn't directly result in task performance. It actually works through joints, and that is how we result in task performance. So muscles actually works through joints, and ligaments and other structures, articular surfaces are involved, and these results in task performance, that is task completion or task achievement. At the same time, the second point is these joints are also responsible for sensory afferent feedback to the CNS or to the muscle. That is in terms of helping us understand proprioception and giving us feedback about joint position sense, so that we have an understanding about whether the task is being accomplished or not. So these are the two major things that joint has an important role on. So there was a number of research that was conducted on previously, but they try to alter the variable as joints, in which they try to make changes in the joint structure, which we know that it is going to have an impact on task performance. So that study was not valid. And then later they also tried to do changes in the sensory feedback. But once they try to uh, uh, once they tried to bring any changes with the sensory afferent nerves, they knew that they were also bringing changes with the feedback that the person would get through the task performance. So that was also not a success. Later in point, this was this challenge, but in this study, this challenge has been overcome by taking the advantages of the unique characteristics of rat knee. That is, we are going to take rat, and now for now with 2 3 points, we are going to try to understand what are these unique characteristics of the rat knee. So initially speaking, the rat knee has very similar properties like how uh, our knee functions in terms of patella moving in between the trochlear groove and vastus medialis and vastus lateralis working on with the mediolateral forces, and that the the torque that is created by just a second, I would use pen to highlight. A torque that is created by lateralis medialis and intermedialis actually does not involve any torque in hip, but then any changes that comes in the rectus femoris has an involvement of hip, because it is a two joint muscle. So these muscles, therefore, the muscles that I'm talking about here now majorly is vastus medialis and vastus lateralis, which has a major contribution in terms of joint medial lateral forces in the joint, but they have very minimal contribution in terms of task performance. They have so that the term that they have used is redundant. That is, they are excessively present there. They are not because the task can be completed by rectus femoris also. Vastus medialis and lateralis is present there as a redundant contribution, but they have major contributions in medial lateral forces. So in the rat knee, these medial lateral patella forces are not transmitted to the tibia. They are actually balanced by the contact forces between the patella, that is in the trochlear groove. They are not directly transmitted to the tibia, but then they are transmitted to these contact surfaces. So to prevent this contact surfaces from having any injury or joint pain or increase in overloading, the CNS should therefore balance this activation equally of vastus medialis and vastus lateralis equally. And by doing so, we'll be able to have less impact on the joints and actually get more torque. This is why these all characteristics helps us to have rat knee as our model for experiment, to do traceable experiments on understanding neural regulation of joint stresses and strain. So now that we have understood about the unique characteristics of rat knee and that how it is how it can be used to replicate or understand or do experiments on understanding joint stresses and strain through CNS, we are going to now try to understand what are the three outcomes that can come, what are the three potential strategies that our CNS could adapt for after there is a vastus lateralis uh, denervation, after there is a paralysis of vastus lateralis. So the first one, that is the first option that could happen, is when the CNS prioritizes task performance over anything. So the moment the CNS prioritizes task performance, what happens is the only available option is to increase the activation of vastus medialis. So when there is an increased activation of vastus medialis, what happens? Of course, the torque is increased, but then there is a increased mediolateral strain, or basically the joint integrity is being compromised through mediolateral strains. So that is the first thing that happens when the CNS prioritizes the task performance. Second thing, if the CNS prioritizes the joint integrity, what would happen? If the CNS prioritizes the joint integrity, because it knows that if it uses vastus medialis, it would have joint strain, that is, joint integrity would be compromised. So it increases the activation of rectus femoris, by doing which the torque is actually maintained, but there is an increased activation of hip flexors, because rectus femoris is a two joint muscle. So it will also activate hip, by which we are actually compromising on the task performance. So the performance of the task will be compromised. The next one we see is when the CNS considers both task performance and internal joint stresses. So when it has to consider both of these things, it has to activate rectus femoris more than vastus medialis. So the vastus medialis is activated, but is activated minimally, and rectus femoris is activated maximally. So in this, although we have a hip torque, but then it is not more like how we saw in the previous one. It is minimal, but we also have to compromise on the mediolateral strain that we are going to get. So these are the three possible adaptation strategies that the author has already previously given, even before we go to the experiment. I believe till here it's all clear. So we have now seen the adaptation strategies, the three different strategies, what can happen if the CNS prioritizes the task performance. Then we are compromising on the integrity. If the CNS prioritizes the joint integrity, we are compromising on the task performance. If we are prioritizing both, then we are actually not having an optimal action of both. We are compromising on both in a minimal way. Before that, we saw the unique characteristics of rat knee, and before that, we saw why are joints important and the two reasons for this. Moving on to the experiment. I would like to start with the ethical approval, because animals are involved. Animal Care Committee of the Northwestern University approved of all the procedures. The experiments were performed with female Sprague Dawley rats. 6 rats were used for this experiment. The experimental protocol. So there were 8 steps that was being followed. I would like to start with the first step. That is, the rats were actually trained on the treadmill even before any procedures were done to get a stable gait pattern. So why they are training the rat on a treadmill to get stable pattern is what we will understand through the next step. That is, they were implanting electrodes. So where are these electrodes being implanted? They were implanted in the 7 muscles, that is rectus femoris, vastus medialis, vastus lateralis, that those being the chief contributors for knee extension. Biceps femoris pelvis, that is the hip extensor, gracilis, and semimembranosus and semimembranosus. These 3 muscles contribute for the hip extensor, and the last one, that is tibialis anterior, which is responsible for dorsiflexion of the ankle. So these 7 muscles were having electrodes. Like you can see in this image, the electrodes were placed inside the muscle after the animals were anesthetized, and they were implanted. And after that, the electrodes leads were tunneled subcutaneously, and they were placed in the back of the rat. So now that we have understood about how the implantation of the electrodes were done, we'll move on to the next step. That is recovery of 10 days. The after the procedure, the rats were allowed to recover for 10 days. Post which the initial baseline outcome measures were taken. That is the kinematics and EMG activity in treadmill. And there were many other outcome measures in the results part we will be seeing. The fifth step was the vastus lateralis was being paralyzed. How they paralyzed the vastus lateralis is, before the paralysis of vastus lateralis, I would like to say how the recording was done. The recording was done by treadmill walking, 2 minutes of locomotion at a comfortable speed. The inclination was used in the treadmill so that there is maximum involvement of quadriceps firing. Now the fifth step, that is vastus lateralis paralysis. How they did this, they exposed the quadriceps nerve. They exposed the quadriceps nerve and they isolated the branch of the that's applied to the vastus lateralis. They anesthetized the branch with lidocaine, and then they tied two locations, proximal and distal, and then the center of the nerve was cut between the sutures. Between the sutures, it was cut. So that is how the vastus lateralis paralysis had happened, had taken place. Then the next step is recording after first, second, and the 7th week. So that is the follow-up recordings that they had done. The recording was very similar to the previous recording, baseline recordings that we have talked about. The 7th step is the animals were euthanized, that is killed in a humane way. And lastly, their muscle masses were weighed. Muscle masses of different, for example, we will know why the muscle masses were weighed in the result part, and the electrodes locations were verified. Why the electrode locations were verified is if at all there is any displacement of the electrodes, and that was seen, the subject or that animal was not taken into consideration for data. They had disregarded that animal, and one animal has been disregarded because of the displacement of electrodes. So now that we have understood how the experimental protocol worked, we'll be directly jumping into the results, which has the major contribution over here. So initially, he wanted to justify about how successful was the paralysis of vastus lateralis. Okay, before going to the results, I would like to ask, is there any questions till far? Am I going very fast or slow, or any point where it was not difficult to understand? Okay, so I would take that as a no or yes. Okay, so moving on. So paralysis of the vastus lateralis by peripheral nerve cut. So to justify how this has happened, he has given a graph showing that the cutting of the vastus lateralis branch, basically immediately after the denervation, there was a loss of activity. We can see that the vastus lateralis showed little, no movement in the EMG, and this also persisted throughout. That is the 7 weeks. Throughout the 7th week of the EMG study reports, there was no activation, which shows the consistent loss of activation. Post this, they also checked the mass of the vastus lateralis muscle. So this is where I talked about at the 8th step, when the masses of the muscles were weighed, which resulted in a significant difference in terms of grams. The mass were weighed, and which reflects the atrophy of the paralyzed muscle. So this was the first result that they had come up with. Then the second one is preferential increase in rectus femoris activation. Why the word preferential is used here is, like we saw the adaptation strategies, there were many different strategies that could have used. There was vastus medialis that could have strengthened, there was rectus femoris, but rectus femoris was preferred to be strengthened, to be activated more. So we'll also understand this through a graph. So the paralysis of the vastus lateralis will cause medial forces That is what we have understood. Medial forces produced by vastus medialis. Medialis will cause medial forces to the mediolateral forces to the joint trace. So the joint has to opt for a option which doesn't cause this strain. That is what the understanding is, and that is what the hypothesis is. So we are trying on to prove that. So we predicted so what is happening here is we see that immediately after the vastus lateralis denervation, we can see that there is some activation of medialis, vastus medialis, and we can see some major activation of rectus femoris. But this is soon replaced in the second week by
Justin, your voice is low. Can you speak a bit louder?
yes, sir. Yes, sorry, sir. Yeah. What I was saying is there was immediately there was an increase in activation of vastus medialis and rectus femoris that can be seen in the first week of the denervation, followed by in which the second week the vastus medialis actually didn't show much activation, but then the rectus femoris continued to show much more activation than it was showing in the baseline, followed by which we can see that the vastus medialis actually in the 7th week basically returned to the same kind of EMG activities that it was very similar to the baseline, how it was in the baseline initially. And that we can see by the rectus femoris that it is actually more rectus femoris showing increased activation compared to vastus lateralis. Vastus medialis. So that is what we have understood from this preferential increase in rectus femoris, and that by the end of 7th week there was activation of rectus femoris, not vastus medialis. This is also something that we can understand from a different graph through which we can see that the rectus femoris is over here, and the blue color graph line shows the base, and the yellow color graph line shows the 7th week. We can see that the blue and the yellow has a substantial gap in between, which shows that the significance increase in the activation. But on the other hand, when we see the vastus medialis, we see that the blue color and the yellow color are very similar and closer to each other in terms of activation. And this over here, when we see the right hand side the graph, this shows the integral activity of all the subjects together. The shaded gray part shows the rectus femoris activation compared to the base. To the 7th week, there was an increase. There was an increase in the activation, and the base and the 7th week of vastus medialis, there is similarity between the base and the 7th week EMG studies. So that is what we understand from this result, and the author is trying to say that because of the results actually demonstrate that the CNS preferentially increased the activation of rectus femoris following the vastus lateralis paralysis. This is actually consistent with the hypothesis that a neural regulation of internal joint stresses and strains actually exist. So now that we have understood about preferential increase in rectus femoris activation, now we are going to see the next result that they have concluded is increase in rectus femoral muscle mass. So similarly, they have done a study which they have weighed the muscle mass of the rectus femoris post 8 weeks, and they have found out that they have taken muscle mass of all three: vastus intermedialis, vastus medialis, and rectus femoris. And what they found was there was increase in rectus femoris muscle mass. So this is also called as use-dependent muscle growth, because rectus femoris was forced to be used over here as a compensatory muscle. So it was showing hypertrophy in terms of muscle growth, and which showed also increase in muscle mass. So this also complements to the previous result that there was the CNS prioritized the joint stress over the joint, and it considered it's not prioritized, but it considered the joint stresses and strain, and activated rectus femoris over vastus medialis. The next result that we're going to move on to is adaptation in overall joint kinematics. So overall joint kinematics, we are going to see about the range of motion in hip, in knee, and in ankle. I'm sorry, in hip, knee, and ankle, we are going to see. And what we see here is, again, we are going to see a graph. First, we'll see the knee. To explain this graph, the x-axis is the gait cycle, that is from 0 to 100. It is the phase of the gait, that is the percentage. And the y-axis, it's the range of motion, that how much range it starts and then how it moves on as it progresses in the gait cycle. So the above bars are the above bars indicates how much percentage of time that the rat has spent, the animal has spent in stance phase. The blue indicates the base, that is the initially without the vastus lateralis. The 61 percentage, that is the orange color, indicates the week 1, and the 65 percentage indicates the week 7 of how much time. So 65 percentage of time the animal has spent in gait cycle in stance phase. Coming on to the knee, we understand here that immediately as the knee as the gait cycle starts, there is a drop in the range of motion of the knee because there is no active extents are involving, and then there is an increase in the range, and then it follows. Moving on to the next one, that is the ankle range of motion. We see that on the contrary to the knee, the ankle range of motion actually increases. If I could help you guys to see this, the ankle range of motion increases. It might be because to compensate, and then it decreases, and then it moves on to similarly to the baseline. On the third way, when we see the hip range of motion, we see that it is not actually showing any substantial changes, but it is actually similar and was minimally affected. So the duration of the stance phase has also changed. Initially, at the first week, you can see the duration of the stand phase has reduced to 61%, and then it has come back to 65% at the week 7th. So this talks about the adaptation of overall joint kinematics. So this is the integrated report of all the animals that was involved, and here the stance phase percentage is shown. So initially in the baseline it was over here, and later it was showing a substantial drop, and then there was an increase, and after that it came back to the baseline itself in the 7th week. The overall joint kinematics we are talking about here. Through this we can understand we'll try to know its implication in the later part of the results. So what we are trying to know here is individually in the hip range of motions, how there was a change, and we are going to see the overall activity over here. So in the week 1, we are going to see the changes. There was a substantial decrease in the range of motion in the week 1 in the hip and the knee range of motion. Then there was an increase in the ankle range of motion in the week 1. In the week 2, we can see that there is again substantial decrease compared to the baseline in the knee and the hip range of motion. And there is again an increase in the ankle range of motion. And then again, we can see that in the week 7th at the end, both hip and the ankle are actually very similar to the baseline. But then we can see that there is some amount of changes still persistent in the knee. Knee is showing some changes in terms of flexion. There is decreased range that can be seen. So what are the implications that we see over here is these results show that the overall joint kinematics are initially impaired. In the first week, second week, we can see that the ankle range of motion is more, and the hip range of motion goes less as a compensatory mechanism. But later, over the subsequent weeks, we see that after the adaptation, these deficits disappear, and the overall locomotor function is restored to the baselines. So that is an important point that we should also remember. But even though the overall locomotor functions are restored to the baseline, there is still a persistent deficit in the knee. That is something that we need to remember, and which also helps us to understand the next result, that is persistent changes in joint kinematics. So now we saw that there was a overall adaptations, different adaptation changes, plus and minus seen in the overall joint kinematics. So we are going to see each separate joint kinematics and see that what are the changes over there. Same thing, we are going to see hip flexion and the knee flexion and the ankle dorsiflexion range of motions. So like we said initially, I believe you guys can see that a small red color muscle, that is rectus femoris, which is a two joint muscle. Because of its activation, which we saw in the previous results, which was more, it actually causes a small changes in the hip range of motion. So if there is changes in the hip range of motion, and if CNS considers separate joint integrity, what it should do is it should actually activate the hip extensors, which should actually come into play when there is an reduction in hip flexion. There should be a counter activity that has to be done, which has to be regulated by CNS. But this was actually not seen. Like we already saw, the electrodes were placed in the hip extensors also, the biceps femoris and semimembranosus and gracilis. We can see that these are actually showing no changes in terms of EMG studies. It was very similar initially how it was in the later stages also. It was very similar. What we understand from here, that is the CNS doesn't give importance to local joint integrity. So it doesn't, because the hip joint is compromising, it doesn't actually activate the hip extensors to overcome the flexion deficit that is happening. Further, studying further more, what we understand that the quadriceps is activated mainly where in the end of the gait cycle, that we also know in a human locomotion, that the end of the gait cycle is where the quadriceps is activated more. We can see like that in these two graphs, the 80 and the 100% at the end percent of the gait cycle is where the quadriceps is activated. And because of this, we are going to see at the end stance of the face, what are the degrees, I'm sorry, we're going to see at the end stance of the face what are the degrees of degree changes that we can see. So remember that we are seeing the end stance face, okay, and we are going to check the degrees in this end stance face. We can see that there is substantial decrease in the hip range of motion immediately after there is an vastus lateralis denervation, that is the first and the second week. And we also see that there is an increase in the ankle range of motions, ankle degrees after the first, second, and even in the 7th week. And we see that the second and the third week in the knee range of motions are decreased. And but then again the knee range of motions are restored back to normal. But what we understood from here is, if we look at only the stance phase, at the end of the stance phase in the gait cycle, we see there are varieties of changes in the joint kinematics, and we don't see an uniformity. So this is where we understand that the compensation of knee extension lost after there is actually a compensation happening in the hip and in the ankle, that is in the proximal and the distal joint, because of the vastus lateralis paralysis, which introduced deviations in the other joints. Yes. And this increased hip flexion is consistent with the hip extensor. Okay, so because this is the previous slide that I had shown, where the rectus femoris was activated, and because of which there was compromisation in the hip flexion, which was not, the CNS didn't regulate that, and CLS actually didn't regulate that. We saw that through the help of understanding of the EMG studies of hip extensors. Now that we have understood that there is a persistent changes in single joint kinematics, we are going to see what happens to the global joint kinematics. What happens to the global joint kinematics? So over here, when we see this is also again this indicates the end phase of the end stand phase of this graph indicates the end stand phase. So here they are checking a limb angle and the limb length to check for the global limb kinematics. That also indicates to an extent of task performance. So here they see that immediately after the denervation, the first week, there is some changes. There is both the limb length and the limb length and the limb angle were initially altered. Were initially altered because of the vastus lateralis paralysis. However, these alterations, actually what happened is they came to the baseline. If you can see that they were altered, but after that they came again to the baseline. They were actually very similar to the previous pre vastus lateralis paralysis baseline that they had taken. It was very similar to those. So what does this show is, uh, yeah, this is also consistent with the earlier stage of the gait cycle. So this graph over here shows the early stage of the gait cycle. The lower graph, so this was the late stage of gait cycle, this was the early stage of gait cycle. In both the gait cycle EMG studies, and the response were very consistent, that even though there was initially some alterations, later point of stage after the 7th week, they restored back to their baseline. So what does this actually implicate is, this result suggests that the CNS adopts a control strategy. So we'll see what is this control strategy that limits the integral joint stresses and strain and restores the global aspects of locomotion. So we understand this. This is actually consistent with the uncontrolled manifold analysis done by said by Latash. So he also that uncontrolled manifold analysis is one of the theories that came up after the degrees of freedom problem and the motor equivalence problem. So that was one of the answers. So this basically is consistent with that idea. It says that what does it say? It suggests that there is an hierarchical control of movement. What do you mean by hierarchical control of movement is that the global limb variables, that is the task goals, are preserved, and the individual joint angles, that is the lower level of variables, are actually allowed to vary. So that is what we can see over here, that even though initially there was some alterations, but in the later point of view, the global limb kinematics was preserved. um, so this is one of the animation that you can see, that how the walking was done. Although there was a treadmill that was involved, but there was no upper body support given to the rat. The rat was walking in the forelimbs, and they had also done this just to see that so this is how. So to give a summary about the results, um, so first we saw that there is a preferential increase in rectus femoris activation. Why preferential is? It is rectus femoris activated over vastus medialis to preserve joint integrity, and that is held by the second point here that is given as the increase in rectus femoris muscle mass, which shows that use dependent increase in the muscle mass. And the third point over here, we see that there's adaptation in the overall joint kinematics. We saw that there was first initially some alterations in the different aspect of joint kinematics, but then later the overall joint kinematics we can see that there was some amount of changes, but some similarities in different joints. And then we saw the persistent changes in the joint kinematics, that we saw that because of one joint, there were other joints having to compensate for that. So there was some changes in the other joints. And we lastly saw that the restoration of global limb kinematics, that is irrespective of the lower level variables, the upper level variables, that is the global limb kinematics, the task performance was focused more, but also taking into consideration the joint integrity. So saying that, we'll be concluding. So in the conclusion, it says that supporting the hypothesis, they found that animals compensated for vastus lateralis paralysis by increasing the activation of rectus femoris while maintaining the activation of vastus medialis, okay, at the levels similar to those observed in the perturbations. So the levels of the vastus lateralis was also maintained, but at the same time there was increased activations of rectus femoris. This strategy restores the knee extension torque while causing minimal additional mediolateral patellar forces. So there is, although mediolateral patellar forces happening, but then it is minimal compared to what it would have happened if the joint, if the CNS is prioritizing or taking into consideration predominantly only the joint integrity. The third point says that the increased rectus femoris activation resulted in persistent perturbations in joint kinematics, due to the extra hip flexion torque from the rectus femoris. So there was actually persistent changes in the joint kinematics in single joints seen in the hip joint and the ankle joint, but the global aspect of the limb kinematics were restored. So these results actually suggest that CNS considers internal joint stresses and strains when choosing muscle activation. So lastly, I would like to relate this to the initial question that they were doing, that many other factors can influence the activations of the muscles through CNS. And this research, they are trying to say that the one of the criteria that the CNS is trying to include is the joint stress and strain. So by saying so, I would like to uh, yeah, hand over it to the delegates. Thank you.
Thanks, Javasin. It was a really very beautiful portrayal of the paper. We don't get to see it was like seeing the real experiment going on. And so thank you for explaining it with so much clarity. I really appreciate the amount of understanding you have got from this. So that made it very clear. Yeah. So now the session is open for questions, and I want you to. Okay, there are appreciations coming from all directions. Right. Yep. So, any questions?
Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yeah, sir.
Sir, no, I'm just curious, like, if this is the case, now what happens when we have inflammatory changes in the joints when there is active pathology going on? How does the CNS tries to recruit the muscles? Like, will it nullify the muscles, or in what basis it does recruit when there is an active pathology going on?
Okay. So, you're asking what kind of changes we can anticipate when there is a inflammation in the joint, right?
Yes, yes. Or if there is, like, we see like amputation patients where people the joint is disarticulated. Now, then what happens if there is any drastic change in the recruitment of muscles in amputation, people with amputation?
Okay. So, what do you think will be the direction of the change?
Not sure, because since this study talks about one particular variable where they have paralyzed the medialis muscle and found out that rectus femoris is preferentially compensating for that. But if there is no paralysis per se and the stress in the joint is global, and I'm not sure, like, on what basis, I'm
What
clueless.
changes would be there? I think,
Yeah. Will there be any preferential activation of unidirectional muscle, or?
yeah. So I think we need to go on to studies in order to understand the results of it, because okay, Jefferson, you're trying to point out on something. Jefferson?
Yes, sir. I was trying to point out this particular part where it talks about the implications to clinical syndromes such as knee osteoarthritis.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Selva sir,
Yeah.
1 second, sir. Yeah, I'm just. Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Actually, we feel that to compromise, I mean, the knee strain, not compromise, to avoid the knee strain, and rectus femoris is activated. So in some, it is actually also seen vice versa. Like we take DMD children's when they reach that end stage, sort of when they stop walking, the cutoff point is quadriceps power goes less than 3, ideally maybe 2. So then they compensate that knee extension by excessive plantar flexion. So also even when that is not possible, they passively lock the knee joint. In fact, that time the joint integrity is compromised. So here the function is preferred over the joint integrity. Like the person has to ambulate at any cost. So so that excessive plantar flexion is bringing, and then the knee joint goes for hyperextension. That's how they try to kind of walk. So here the compromise is happening to increase the joint range by passively locking it when there is a muscle weakness happening. So I think end of the day, the task, based on the task, I think the compromises happens. Is that inference is correct, sir?
I think that should be that is the case, because we also see that when it is not possible for some work to be done, it is compensated in a certain other way. Right.
Yes.
So it's true. What you're telling is absolutely true. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So from this study, can we take that CNS tries to adapt and keep the function alive in whichever way it is possible? So if by altering muscle actions around one joint, it is continuing to have that function go. Similarly, if that entire joint, the muscles controlling that entire joint are weak, for example, in DMD, it is doing the compensatory changes in ankle. So likewise, just to keep a human body mobile or any living body mobile, the CNS has continuing adaptations going on to keep ourselves moving. So from this article, can we take that whatever abnormal patterns we are getting are in any pathological conditions are the CNS adaptation to keep the body moving?
I think from what Selva sir is telling, which we also is very logical for us to see. So there are adaptations going on, and we might not feel that that is normal, but even with that, the CNS might be trying to push us to keep the functioning going on.
Yeah, it's the best possible way.
Yeah, in the best possible way. Now, that is one of the thought process which I think many of us were also having for a very long time. And even while listening to Anatole Feldman and Latash speaking on what seems to be the primary variable which is being controlled, they tell that nothing is controlled. All right. And this particular paper, which tells that the joint stresses and strains are kept in a normal in a normal way, and it's not altered greatly this by bringing out certain other changes. This particular line of thought was predominant between the 1950s and 1950s to 2000, where the CNS was trying to optimize something. Okay, optimize one particular function, like in walking, the energetics was being optimized, or now as we see that the joint stresses and strains are being optimized. But so I think really we need to look into whether it is trying to optimize something. Okay, as far as this particular article is concerned, they have very clearly delineated and have told that the joint stresses and strains have been controlled efficiently. It compromises in certain other part, but it's also compensated in a third part, and overall the kinematics have been kept normal. That's what it says. So I do have reservations on these results as to whether there is any particular aspect of motor control that the brain tries to control. So we need to wait and see how it is going to be. So
So, and one more thing, what are your thoughts or opinion about our role in this? Like, how do a physiotherapist play a part in treating where all these joint stresses and strains are altered or controlled by CNS? What is our role in treating or rehabilitating? Just the opinion, like, how do we
I
come
think
into
that inferences sometimes they should not correct the abnormality.
So yeah, many times they said like let the patient move the way he wants to move.
Yes.
So how exactly?
because if we are going to think in that way, then any option which they select should be fine, right? But if the findings of this study is right, then we might also get a clue as to there might be certain things which it is trying to optimize, and we may need to see whether such things are being optimized or not. Okay, so we might need to look into it. But I think we need to wait till we reach the end of the motor control program, because we cannot take one particular study and try to decide on, okay, now all the muscles are trying to optimize the joint stresses and strains. This is one of the thought process which is going on. So we may need to wait for a certain more time in order to get an inference from this. Okay, that's what is my take on this particular outcomes from this study.
Yes, thank you.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, you can go ahead. I think some
Yeah. Dhwani, is it Dhwani?
yeah, sir. Okay. So I also wanted from after reading this article, what came across to me was they had started the introduction with the aim that until now this particular aspect of research of what is the impact on joint strain and stresses and how much is it the CNS tries to control it was done with respect to only injuries, but not normally. But the article in itself, like they have completely denervated a muscle. And if we try to then implicate it in even in the end what conditions they have mentioned, like patellofemoral arthritis, we never see a case where one particular muscle is completely denervated. It's always according to what the alignment is, and even in neurological conditions, like very few, at least in CPDMD, it's not like one particular muscle is completely denervated. So how much can we like take what they have said to human normal adult population or to the conditions that we see? So like that is something I found I had going on when reading this thing.
Okay, right. Anyone would like to just give your viewpoint on what Ms. Dhwani is telling?
Yes, sir. So,
Yeah.
To start with, it's a very excellent presentation because while I was reading that article, this was the thing which was going on in my mind, like how this person is going to actually to explain all these things which we find it very critical to understand, but he had explained it so well, and I think he needs a very big applause for that. And the way he had explained it, each and everything, he made sure each and every point of time. I think that's a very phenomenal presentation. uh, Hats off to you. And to start with, again, what I have been thinking in this is, we as physios, we cannot be think primarily as clinicians. Whatever we read up, we end up with correlating it with our clinical conditions and correlating with our treatment things. I think even though Vasantan sir had emphasized in the early stages also that we have been in the process of understanding motor control rather than implementing or deriving something directly to the therapy per se. But yes, obviously, even when I am reading also, it is the type of thing that strikes into my mind. I think everyone is primarily clinicians, so that is somewhat unavoidable. And with these things, yes, because my concern is sort of like where they had evaluated the activation by the rectus femoris and the vastus medialis, and they have hypothesized the selection of the CNS to activate more rectus femoris is to avoid joint stress and joint stress. That is the hypothesis, which may not be, which we may really not know whether that is the real reason for the CNS to take more of why not vastus medialis and why rectus femoris. We may not be know that also in the first place. Maybe with the logical explanations, everything seems to be fine. But on the other hand, why not then, if the CNS gives so much priority to the knee integrity, then why not about the hip integrity then? As they had mentioned already, that there is hip is also, there is some sort of changes are going on, but there is not been given much about it. And and other thing, as Dwayne has also mentioned, it is like where the in Lata's terms, if we have to say, the CNS priorities may not have changed because there is not a primarily a CNS pathology. It is a very, we can say in terms of peripheral pathology. So this may not be directly applicable to where the changes to be there in terms of CNS pathologies, where the affection is primarily at the central nervous system, where the priorities may can change. At that time, probably the joint stresses may take a back seat, or because we are still at the confusion where whether the kinematics in itself is a deciding factor or a considerable contributing factor on its own. So, and this is one thing, and one more thing, what I felt it to be, which I have not understood, is in what way they are trying to correlate it with the uncontrolled manifold hypothesis, saying that there is a hierarchical control. Because I find what my understanding of UCM or equilibrium point is such that there cannot be, it is like movement is not controlled per se, and it emerges as per the situation. Then why it has been, I felt it, there is somewhat contradictory, and they are clearly may use the word hierarchical control is there. Hierarchical control in terms of maybe the overall kinematics, what they are saying, but I am not understanding. I still feel uh, the CNS gives major priority to the task per se rather than the and at the whole in preventing or in managing the overall joint kinematics. Yes, what we have understood from this paper is we need not to ignore the joint kinematics on the we need not to outrightly reject it. Maybe it has some role to play with, which we may have to wait and see. Uh, Maybe that is one thing which CNS is considering when considering of 1,000 things. This may also be one of the things which is been to be considered. That is what we can say, at least for these things. If not of CNS pathology, at least for these conditions. That is what we can say. I think for right now, this should not make us arise the questions of like whether task-oriented training is in itself is questionable. We need not to think to that extent by this preliminary results. On the other hand, I would say, like, even TK, let us consider that internal joint stresses has been considered. Do we have any capability within our hands at this point of time to alter that, yeah, to facilitate that these things at this point of time. I presume we may not have that capability to intervene the CNS or to facilitate the CNS. What we can do at this point of time is maybe like that motor behavior and task performance is the thing which we can see and which we can improvise. So for now, with respect to therapy point of view, we have to consider with these things, and we can just focus on these things. What is the role of joint kinematics in deciding motor control?
Okay. Yeah. Before putting out my views for Dhwani's and Sheikh says, I think Jabastin had some, he had read the paper, so he has some point to tell about the question. Jabastin, you can please tell about it.
Yes, sir. So I had actually send that in the group, which says that the more broadly, the experiment that the author has done has highlighted the importance of how to say, like how Sheikh sir said, they are not exactly outrightly rejecting this. They are not asking us to reject the joint stresses and strain or the integrity per se, but then that is also one of the criteria through that CNS considers. So that was the initial point that they wanted to make, that they are trying to find out what are the different variables through which the muscle is activated by CNS. So that is one major conclusion from this that we can take, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So first, starting with the Dhwani's thing, you had raised a question on how ecologically valid is the findings from this particular work, because when we generally see that in many of the clinical conditions, we don't have a single muscle which is affected, but a group of muscles are affected, right? So now what happens is when we are going to ask a question like this, how ecologically valid it is, it always comes when we are trying to immediately translate the results of it and compare it with what happens in the clinical scenario, right? So that we may not be able to directly implicate it and compare it with clinical scenario, but what we need to take is what seems to be the function of the brain in this particular instance. That's what they are telling. So if multiple muscles are affected, then there might be changes, but those changes might be very different from these changes. But still, even during that time, it can have its own impact. That is, variations might be coming. So it is not to be connected directly, but then we need to understand that, okay, in here they have seen some changes. So a similar pattern of change or similar pattern of control system might be there even in other conditions. So, so I don't think we need to take it directly and try to implicate it. Okay, that is one.
Okay, sir.
All right. And second one is, as Sheikh sir has said, it might not be possible for us to directly try and apply it on patients with the current tools. And this in no way is questioning the prior hypothesis that the brain is trying to come out with a solution according to the demands which are placed on the environment, and we need to support it in doing so. Okay. Now, regarding the hierarchical control which Sheikh sir has asked, I think hierarchical control is valid, and but it is not definitely, as you rightly pointed out, it is not definitely about the joint kinematics that the hierarchical control is about. Sir, Sheikh sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's not about the joint kinematics that it is trying to control, and there is a hierarchy in that control. Okay, right? So what control they tell about is the brain seems to be capable of controlling only one factor, and it is controlling that. But that factor may not lead to an ideal control of muscle when the environmental factors are coming in. Okay. So that's what they are telling. So we will talk more about the hierarchical control when we come to the referent configuration hypothesis, because that's where they have explained it more with more clarity. Okay. All right. So so my point is, let us take this result and have it. There seems to be one author who tells that something is being given more preference as compared to other thing. And when we see the motor control concepts of Latash or Anatole, they are still not clear what is the performance variable that the brain is trying to control. It could be anything. So they have also kept it open. So we cannot close that. These results are not, we cannot consider it. Okay, right? So we need to keep it open. My only point is, does the brain optimize this or not is a question. And I think when Matthew Tresh is going to present, I think all the other speakers would also be there, Latash and Anatole Feldman. So they can give us, throw us more clarity on that particular point. All right. So,
Sir, can I add something?
yeah, please.
When you were explaining, I think this came to me again. I might be taking example from a clinical this thing, but
Yeah, sure.
this is what I was thinking. So, sir, in rehab, whenever we do rehab in neurological conditions like even say CP or stroke, one of the reasons one of the logic we put when we are trying to correct how a person walks or in changing the kinematics is related to joint stresses and strains, that whatever altered pattern is there is actually harmful to the patient. They will come with later pain and OA and everything. So if we consider valid what this study is trying to tell us about brain's preference for joint stresses and strains, then I don't think that we need to worry about the kinematics when in from the rehab point of view, because it is already being taken care of. And even clinically, it is not always a causal this thing we see, like okay, a certain patient is walking with a certain altered kinematic, he will definitely result with pain or OA or whatever it is. So am I thinking right, like we can consider that okay, this might be one of the things that the CNS actually considers when during motor control.
Okay, so you mean to tell we can just sit quiet so that the brain can take over and it can perform the work
From
we are
this
doing?
extreme to that extreme now. I think we have to keep it open, and we should not we should not take it for granted also for now at this point of time.
Yeah, so it can
Actually,
the
I feel that
conclusion can be taken both the ways, like okay, this is also there, this might be also there, we don't know.
We are not sure about it, but even if we are going to try to correct it, I don't think we will be able to I'm not sure I have seen any studies where we have really tried to change something internally and we have actually changed it by rehabilitation. Maybe globally we might have seen something, even with a simple thing of kinematic pattern globally, that is walking pattern or things like that. We see that it's not under our control, even if we try to correct it. But it takes its own time and things in order to move from one pattern to the other pattern. So
Right.
that's a different thing. Silvasa, you were telling something.
Yeah, actually, in the previous one said that when a group of muscles are affected, how that would be, one observation in GBS. So when the person is recovering, so out of the enthusiasm, much before the actual strength is required for walking, they will start walking is still walking is possible, but that is bizarre, as well as that efficiency is not there. So and later, at the later point of time, they almost get back that original walking style, everything. So but what happens is, like, functionally it is possible at any point of time when group of muscle is affected, and with a lot of compensation they try to walk. but then walking efficiencies, they're compromised. It's not like
Yes.
Braille is now, yeah, now it is taking care of everything. He's also walking equally like anybody. No, the walking efficiency obviously compromised.
No,
So
sir,
that's what we need
that's
to
what.
make a,
No,
yeah.
that's what. If walking efficiency, if we are telling is compromised, definitely it's compromised as compared to normal. But
Yes.
here the system is deficient in itself,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, but
So
still the walking is possible. So that that's what I would say, that like we cannot consider that as okay, brain has compensated, but somewhere something else is compromised. I mean,
yeah.
it's not totally taken care. So that could be the answer for that whole group of muscles are affected. What happens is so there must be somewhere else there is a compromise happening. And second thing is when it comes to which joint to really bothered. So here the primarily when the vastus lateralis is paralyzed, to compensate that or to take care of the joint stress, so there's some other muscle is overactivated. So that results in some other joint also into trouble. But again, I think that preference is happening of which is better. With the example of DMD again, when we see that abductor muscles are weak, the waddling gait is happening, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
but at the same time, when quadriceps is affected, it is not being totally, I mean, it is going for some other compensation at the ankle level. So I mean, I always feel that probably the knee joint is a very important joint in the lower limb where that locking and unlocking mechanism is happening. So maybe the preference would be given to that. I mean, the weightage would be given to that function, and that process they can compromise another joint.
And that is, you mean to tell, without buckling down and falling, right? The
Yeah,
knee,
that would be the
the knee
preference.
seems to be important in not going down
Then
because
that
of
the
the leg
excessive
problem.
lordosis at the hip joint, sorry, excessive lordosis at the spine, and the anterior pelvic tilt at the hip joint. So these are all can be, compromised. That is no kind of preferred over the knee is buckling.
Mm.
So I think Sheikh sir was telling, right. So he was telling like why not hip joint? No, also is not been taken care.
Mm.
So what is best possible? That's what I feel that.
Mm.
Is that correct?
Uh, Sir, I think in one way when we see, it is correct, all right? But this paper, what I felt interesting in this paper was they are trying to point out what exactly they have told that the global kinematics is maintained. Okay, right? The hip joint is flexing more, right? And but they have not said or discussed, and we are also not able to come to any idea as to whether the rectus femoris excessive activity is creating some other changes, negative changes. That far we are not, we have not gone, and we are not able to see that, right? So despite trying to maintain the global kinematics, let's leave out the concept of kinematics, but walking, right? Still the brain tries to bring out certain optimal solutions to certain other problems which might be happening. So that is the novel point which they are trying to point out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, right? So the previous ones were telling that they this is what they are optimizing, rather they are not optimizing the other factors, right? So energy, someone said that energy optimizes, energy is being optimized, the other thing is not being optimized. And also some say that the joint degeneration has to be prevented since we work for a very long number of years. So that needs to be prioritized, but not the others, right? So it was like that. But in this article, what I find is the overall function is not the criteria for the walking is maintained, but still it is additionally trying to add on one particular variable, and it's able to control that. The system is able to control that. But whether the reason is actually what they authors think, or it is trying to do something else and these results have come, we are not sure. But he seems to, Matthew Presh seems to tell that. So that's what I think about it.
Yeah, that's what.
And I think Imam has said something. She has said that in one of the important paper which explain changes in referent body location configuration mental, they are trying to explain with the joint position and posture stabilizing mechanism and movement problem. So by reading further, we will understand the optimization. We need more views before concluding anything. This is my understanding. Okay, so it's being told that let's wait for some more time and let's look into all aspects before trying to conclude whether this is what it is optimizing. I think that's the way we need to go ahead, since we are not very clear as to this, and it is questioning some of the concepts which we had before. So we will have to wait for some time before concluding that it is this way or it is the opposite.
Just one question, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, no, like when we do resistance exercise, like we give challenge to the muscle, we expect a response in kind of hypertrophy the muscles. So how do we differentiate it from that, saying that is it just a peripheral adaptation of a rectus femoris, or it is a selective preferential activation of the rectus femoris? So why can't it be just a peripheral adaptation? Because now after the paralysis, the joint torque is more, which has to be balanced by increased torque from the remaining muscles. So is it just a peripheral adaptation, or we can still call it as a preferential activation?
No, you were telling about the strengthening to the muscles what we are giving.
Yes.
So so I'm not getting where does this
both are
differential
same.
So I
activation come?
think he's saying it cannot be from the CNS preference. Why not the natural choice available, like so other group of muscles which get strengthened, they utilize, for example, that when vastus lateralis is paralyzed, the other two muscles actually take over that. Not exactly from the CNS, actually has to prefer all these things.
Which muscle takeovers is the question, and why it is should be rectus femoris. That is what I think the authors are trying to find out. And if we say if it is a peripheral adaptation, why peripheral adaptation only to rectus femoris and not that much or to vastus medialis? That is what they are trying to find out. That is what I understood.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, they one point they mentioned the easy option is only activating vastus medialis. Why rectus femoris like that? So they say that if various vastus medialis is activated, it will produce joint strain. That is also that as a pathology we can see in patellofemoral arthritis and all. So in order to avoid that, it activates rectus femoris more and slightly vastus medialis also.
Okay, but Saravana, Saravana, you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I still didn't get what was the comparison that you had asked for.
No, I was just asking, is it just a peripheral adaptation from the muscle, or it's whether actually any preferential activation happening? Because when we do strengthening exercise,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, right. So that's a question I think we may not be able to answer with this particular study. Here, they seem to tell there is a preferential activation. That's what they are trying to tell, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we leave it there because we cannot. The question is not compared over here, right? But whenever we give a strengthening exercise, we don't think that only we are just moving that, because the other 23 hours the person is walking, and that can be incorporated. Sorry, that can be the motor control system might utilize that extra strength, and it might also start changing its way how it is activating it. Sometimes it might work antagonistic to what we are trying to do. Sometimes it might take it up and utilize it in order to produce a better motor control. All right, so we always have to leave that particular part of it, whether it's only this or also that. That I think we may need to have a different session where we bring in different types of studies and then question about it.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
Okay, so I think such explicit presentation brings in a lot of understanding to all of us, and we are able to ask a lot of questions. Okay, right? That I think we need to continue, and I think it's also a lesson for many of us to critically read the paper, read the references, go back and try to understand what is being said, and then try to present it. So I think it's an example we all need to take, right? And Jebastin, once again, I think everyone have given their appreciation. So once again, applause from everyone, I hope, for your presentation. So keep it up, and we hope more papers are being explained in this particular way. Thank you, Jebastin. Before concluding, I just wanted to find out whether all of us are on the same page regarding the presentations. The next week, we will try to have CPG and human locomotion in the context of indirect parametric control of motor action. We might require slightly better understanding of referent control in order to gauge how does he bring in this. I think we may not be able to have a very beautiful understanding of it, but still we will try to read it, and let's make the points which are not going to come. I think Rajlakshmi is here, right? So you'll be doing it next week, Raji?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So along with one second.
Articles and all, you'll be guiding us which article we need to present.
I think we have kept the book part, which talks about the CPG. That will be the primary reference. And along with that, maybe one or two review article, what he has said, that we will keep it. And I think there were other people also, right?
Bhaskar also with
Bhaskar
CPG.
and Sergio are there. I suppose today, I think they are not there, but they'll be knowing. And next week, we'll be going on with the integration of tactile and kinesthetic information, perception, action, adaptation. That will be by Mr. Ramesh Baban Group. Again, Mr. Ramesh Babu is not here. So we will have to, I'll personally speak with him. So that will be followed by that. Is anyone there in that group? Integration of tactile and kinesthetic information, perception, action, adaptation by Elena Nisky. Today, are anyone available? I think Anandu is there, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Anandu. You can just work with Mr. Ramesh Babu, and you can just try to support how you can come out with the papers. And, Naveen, sir, you're there, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, neural dynamics of movement generation by Gregor Schoner. I think that paper also is going to be tougher because he has come out with dynamic system model, and we may need to understand that. So some amount of preliminary work has to be done from all our side in order to understand what is that. And I feel that a lot of mathematics is going to be there in that paper. But I think Naveen sir and Ridhima ma'am is there. She's staff, and I think Christy and Shruti. Shruti, sir, Sheikh sir, Shruti is from your side, right?
Sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. She's,
Okay. I don't think she's there.
no, she
today.
is not there, sir. I will.
Okay, right. I think Naveen, you may need to have a round of discussion. It is not necessary that we do multiple papers, but if we can understand a few concepts which he is telling, that also should be very nice, because it doesn't seem to be a focused concept, focused paper on an experiment like unlike what we had done in the previous 2 weeks. Okay, right?
Yeah.
So we'll be very happy to see that. Please conduct a meeting. And
Yes.
the reference copy, I think Regina ma'am is there. Suchi is there, Dwani is there, right? So again, reference copy is also a concept which is built on multiple previous papers. So I would prefer, there is one particular review of Mark Latash. In fact, Sebastian has mailed him and he has sent it. We were not able to access it. So that review is being saved in 2021. And you can have that review as a basis, and you can go back to the references and then compare it. And it would be very nice if you can come out and tell us, are there any prior concepts which we need to understand with regard to perception? Okay, so I want your group to please work on and come out with what are the prior ideas that we need to refresh it, whether we should have a discussion where how we understand perception, we need to be clear about it and then look into this paper or not. Okay, right?
Okay, sir. Yesterday, yesterday itself, I messaged Subramaniam sir. I think he is the most senior there. He was busy with something, so he said he'll get back to me, because I know the topic is like very much vast, and so we can start working from it now. That will be great.
Yeah, that will be very much better. Okay, Suchi, you're there. Suchi? Suchi, are you there? No, okay, she's not there.
No.
Right. And Arulmoli is also from your group, Dhwani?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. All right. So they can be there. And lastly, Sheikh sir, I think it's fine. I think you may need to go back to one or two papers of Mindy Levin ma'am. And I think equilibrium point model, from that you may need to come to her work. Okay, right? So equilibrium point model was about one particular muscle, but then from then we have to move on to multiple muscles which work across a joint, and from there we have to see what are the different ranges which are there. So it might require 2 or 3 things. We may not need to go again for 3 or 4 papers, but then if we can go the first paper on equilibrium point model and a second idea on building up of that concept, and finally if we can come to this paper of abnormal control also, it should be fine. Okay,
okay sir.
Yeah, so fine. So I'll just ask the other people also, or you can conduct a meeting, sir, and then you can just do it. Okay, so I think all of us are on the same page, and thanks to the spirit, I hope we keep up the spirit and we enjoy reading these papers, right? And when they are coming, we need to be ready with the questions so that we can have a better clarification and finalize our understanding, or try to improvise our understanding. Okay. Thank you all for coming today, and also to Sebastian for having such a wonderful, interesting way of presenting. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.